everyone. You are very welcome to the latest episode of Talking Technology with NCBI Labs, which brings us up to show number 8 in the current series. This is JP Corkinwich today. I'm standing in for my colleague Jude Marr, and I hope you are keeping safe and well. As always, our podcasts are here to help you stay up to date with the latest trends and developments in technology for people with sight loss. And today is so different because we're going to be sharing with you some exciting news about the recent launch of Inclusivity and Accessibility Labs, or better known as IA Labs, a company that aims to drive forward the issue of equal inclusion and access to the digital world for everyone. And on the show this week, I'm delighted to be joined by IA Labs co-founder Kyran O'Mahoney and Adele Buliman, who is QA and Customer Success Lead with IA Labs. So Kyran and Adele, it's great to have you both with us on the show today.
Thanks, JP.
Thanks, JP.
Okay. I must say, I've been really looking forward to this chat, as it's a topic I've had a very, very special interest in. In a short while, we're going to be talking about the recent launch of IA Labs and the first Digital Accessibility Index. But before that, I'd like to take this opportunity to let our listeners know that our regular podcast host, Jude Marr, is unfortunately going to be leaving NCBI in the coming weeks and has now finished actually hosting the Labs podcast. So Jude has been a regular host from day one of the show and will certainly miss his voice going forward. I think, Kyran, it's fair to say he's going to be greatly missed, and not just by the team, but also by the many listeners who we have on the show.
So yeah, JP, I can't believe it. Jude is finishing up, and I just thought it'd be nice if people don't mind me just weighing in a little bit. I know I'm here to talk about inclusion and accessibility labs, but also, as you know, I run the technology at the NCBI Labs team in NCBI, and Jude is been such a wonderful member of that team. So thanks for giving me a couple of minutes just to talk about Jude and wish him all the best. So I was thinking before we started the podcast this morning, JP, that when we were in the very start of COVID and we came up with the idea of, a technology podcast or a technology live event, I think it was originally, just as a means to convey information to people on sight loss with, all about technology that they can use for themselves during COVID-19. And Jude was such a key member of that project, and really just, really believed in the power of the medium of voice and all those pieces to bring, what do we call it, NCBI live event back then, and yourself and Jude really just got behind it. And I hosted the first few, and then Jude really didn't need me. He was just that good. And he just kicked off and really, drove the podcast to huge success. Both you and Jude have been just instrumental in making what is now Talking Technology just a huge success. So I just want to say, from myself as the CTO in the National Council of the Blind, a huge thank you to Jude. I think he's going to be incredibly missed by me, and I think the whole team would echo that. He's such a wonderful person, and I can't believe he's going. But sometimes people have to move on, and we're really going to miss him. But we genuinely, I think everyone on the team who I've spoken to, really was like, no, don't go.
Surprise, it really was, yeah.
Yeah, but what a great MC and host of Talking Technology, and I think it's going to be very hard to find someone as good.
Absolutely, Kyran. I think we'll really miss him, and we certainly wish him every best. Send him all our best wishes in his future endeavors. Great. So, guys, so as a reminder, if you have any questions or comments about what's being covered on the show this week, you can send an email to labs@ncbi.ie, or you can post a question in the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure to get right back to you. So moving on with the show, there's no doubt that we've entered an age of professionalized internet with a high expectation for accessible websites and mobile applications. And at this point, I'd like to introduce IA Labs. So Kyran, I might start with yourself, and I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about the background to IA Labs, the original concept and inspiration behind it?
So yeah, absolutely. So IA Labs really it evolved out of something we started doing in the National Council for the Blind. When yourself, myself, and some of the other team members in the NCBI started supporting companies on making their websites and mobile applications accessible, I I think we kind of realized how important it was to support as many companies as we could on their journey towards accessibility. And as many of you know, like the mantra that we have in NCBI Labs is, technology is the single greatest enabler for someone with sight loss. And really what we found with digital accessibility is it's far broader than even sight loss. It really is an enabler for all disabilities. So we had been, internally supporting a number of companies, both public and private, on their journeys towards making their websites and mobile applications accessible. And we knew that we needed to build a dedicated team to focus on it exclusively because it was just that important. So JP and many of your own fellow trainers in NCBI
Mm.
spend a lot of time teaching people how to use technology, and then they eventually go to a website and that website is not set up correctly and they're unable to use it. So we knew that we can teach people technology, but also we need to teach the companies, sorry, when I say people, I mean service users
Yeah.
or people with sight loss, how to use technology. But when they go to the website, we also need to teach the companies that build those websites how to make their websites accessible. So it's like a fully holistic approach to digital technology, and we've done it a couple of times. I mean, and JP, you're, you are very modest as always, but you were instrumental as well in some of the initial reviews and checks and putting all of the processes in place to make sure that we were conveying the right information to companies. And that's really where the foundation of IA Labs came from, because we knew this was such an important thing to do. And IA Labs then it was built on that mantra of technology being the single greatest enabler for someone with sight loss or someone with a disability, even more importantly. And what we found, and Adela and the rest of the team in IA Labs, is that we really live by the mantra that we are going to make Ireland digitally accessible, one website and mobile application at a time. So we made a presentation to the NCBI Group Board and said, we think there's something really important here that we need to do. And the board were hugely supportive of that. So IA Labs was formed, Inclusion and Accessibility Labs, with that aim to build a team that's exclusively focused on digital accessibility.
Fantastic. And Kyran, who is on the IA Labs team at present?
So we have a wonderful team actually, and are very passionate people. So the way the team is really structured is there's Adela and Sean Doran lead the accessibility or quality assurance, as we call it. So our QA team. So on that team, there's Sean and Adela and Alice and Diana as well. So we have three people that work all day, every day on performing audits of websites to make sure they're accessible. And I think when we say audits, we mean we review them and we make sure that we find out what the bugs are and what the issues are, where people are being blocked from a perspective of accessibility, and then we offer them solutions on how they can fix it themselves. We also have some Min team that works there and people that support us around engaging with companies. So it's a wonderful team. It's a great. Well, maybe I should ask Adela if it's a wonderful team actually.
it is. Don't worry, don't worry.
It's not good if the boss said it's a wonderful team and then everyone else has gone, I don't like working there. But I think everyone likes working there.
We do, don't we?
That's a good sign. Okay, so I gather then, guys, it seems to be a very broad spectrum of services offered. So it's okay, audits is obviously a significant component, but there's also training, there's like service subscriptions and so forth. And I think one of the cases that I have come across, Kyran, that you mentioned at the launch last Wednesday, which I think we're going to be talking about more detail in a moment, is the extensive reach that some of these audits are reach, like have. Like if we can think of, for example, the COVID tracker app. An audit was done on that, and that the reach here is enormous when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one that I think the whole IA Labs team are particularly proud of, because so the COVID Ireland Tracker app, we were engaged to support the HSE on ensuring that app was accessible as possible, because it was a hugely important application during the pandemic.
Yes.
And so IA Labs would have done accessibility audits, but more than that, as you said, we wanted to really ensure that it met the highest level of standards. And the HSE really wanted digital accessibility to be something that, was just embedded in their development process. So right through even before it had been released, we worked alongside them and we gave them feedback. And like you said, it's not just about performing an audit. We also gave them training, and we worked with their development teams to say, here's where you're doing really good, here's where you're doing not so good, but to give them that perspective of how you would design a mobile application for people with disabilities, and that is a unique perspective on a user experience. So when that app was launched, it has been downloaded by over 1.3 million people in Ireland. It is the most popular app in Ireland. And for an app of that scale, we know that up to 25 to 30% of people need some level of assistive support. So you can say that the work that the IA Labs team did impacted over 300,000 people in this country with disabilities. So that's something that we're all particularly proud of, and I think it's a great relationship to have, and it continues to be used. A lot of the accessibility that we had, it continues to be used across our accessibility work that we did on the COVID Ireland track was inherited and used in many of the same tracker apps across Europe. So massively important piece of work that was done, and we're really proud of it. But it really shows you as you said, JP, the impact or the potential impact of digital accessibility.
Yeah. Well, thanks for telling us about that. And just if I could bring us now to last Wednesday when we launched IA Labs in Dublin, in Mason Hayes Curran. I think there were two things that really stood out for me on the day and in the speeches that were giving. One was an interesting quote was referred to from was a quotation from Tim Berners-Lee, who's director of W3C and inventor of the World Wide Web, which was the power of the web is in its universality. Access to everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. And that is a perspective that I think seems to be holding through to today, decades later. The other, I suppose, the other thing that did really stand out for me is that from the speakers is how emotive each of the speakers were. People were drawing, particularly yourself, Kyran, drawing on your personal experience of really the empowering role that technology has played and continues to play in all our lives. So it goes beyond perhaps the legislative requirements of accessibility and inclusion. It's just the right thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a really key part of the launch, and from my own perspective, as I said during the launch, is that I suffer from sight loss myself. I've had nystagmus or congenital nystagmus and very limited vision. But the importance that technology plays in my own life, and even before I joined NCBI, it really is this key enabler that that I speak of, and that mantra that I say repeatedly, about technology being the single greatest enabler for someone with a disability, really came out of personal experience, and the analogy that I used when during the launch was that on my very first day in computing science degree, I didn't know how to turn a computer on. Like I literally had to ask someone, how does this computer turn on? But then once I was able to turn a computer on and for me, for the first time ever, being able to increase the font size, and being able to make text bigger, it was one of the most, and it's a bad pun, but it was one of the most eye-opening experiences. But and then going through as technology enabled, technology got better and better, through using a tablet or a laptop, and for many years, my entire goal was, I need the biggest screen, or I need how big a screen can I get? How big a laptop can I get? Whereas now, technology has gotten to a point where I can use a 13-inch screen because the accessibility features are so good, and it means that I'm no longer sitting in a meeting when everyone else has cool looking laptops and I've got this absolute monster. So we're at a point where technology is just embedding itself in our lives, and it becomes more about, as I said at the IA Labs launch, it becomes more about, just doing your job, or just, participating in education as opposed to being blocked from education,
Yes.
or participating in employment, and you're the same as anyone else. And really the most important thing is that if you can sit and use a computer, and you're as employable as anyone else in my view. And as a quick reminder for all our service users, is that the technology team in NCBI are here to help around training on use of computers and iPads. So if anyone who's listening today, is struggling in that area, do reach out to us. But IA Labs then is obviously the extension of that, because there's two sides of the coin. One is that we teach people how to use computers and make sure that they're proficient and and employable. At the second time is we want to make sure that the companies that they're working with have digital accessibility in their agenda, and that's the IA Labs side of it.
Yeah, it's a really good message to refer to here. If we can focus for a moment on the area of accessibility and digital inclusion, in your opinion, Kyran, why is it so important, and why is it become so topical of late? We're hearing a lot about it in recent times. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? I think there's a number of aspects of it. Obviously there's EU. I know you're going to talk about this in a moment, but I know that there is EU legislation that's in place, and it is an Irish law as well, that says all public sector websites need to be accessible, and meet a certain level of digital accessibility. But also many companies around on their diversity and inclusion agenda are, part of that agenda is also accessibility. Inclusion is not just about disability. There's other areas of inclusion, but I think a lot of companies are on a journey in Ireland to make sure that one, that they have a specific objection around, or objective. Very, very different word actually. But they have a specific objective to make sure that their websites and areas are inclusive. But I think they're at the start of that journey, unfortunately. But we're here to help them on that journey. So, and it's good that it's higher and higher on people's radars in companies. And I think what we really want to do, like in the example that I gave from the HSE, part of IA Labs objectives is, we want companies to embed accessibility as part of the process to build a website, or as part of the process to build a mobile application. It shouldn't be that, and I've been guilty of this in my own projects back before I joined NCBI, when I built websites, is that you don't want accessibility to something we do at the end of a project. And I've learned the hard way is that anything you say, oh, we'll do that in the final sprint, or we'll do that as just before we go live, there is never time for it. And I think accessibility has sometimes been deprioritized. And nowadays, most companies, because they have a diversity and inclusion agenda, accessibility is part of that. And like your previous guest was saying from Sky, like, it's all about moving accessibility to the left in terms of development.
Yes.
You want it embedded from the very start. And it's great that more and more companies are realizing that now, and IA Labs is here to help. Like, we have dedicated training. We can support all people on their journey towards digital inclusion.
Right. Thanks for that perspective, Kyran. That's very, very important. I might bring Adele in here if you don't mind. I gather just from chatting to Kyran today as well that there seems to be a very broad spectrum of accessibility, insofar as it doesn't take a one size fits all approach. And I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about what exactly is it that sets an accessible website or mobile application apart from one that might not be accessible?
Yeah, thanks, JB. So I think a good place to start is maybe with the WCAG. So they're the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they lay out some pretty, I think, 78 different guidelines for making a website accessible. And as well, I know that NCBI are a charity for blind and visually impaired, but these guidelines actually encompass all disabilities. So it's for people with intellectual disabilities, hearing disabilities, motor disabilities. It encompasses everything. So really following those guidelines is the most important thing if you want to make your site accessible. And then from there, it's a little bit difficult to define exactly what is accessible if it hasn't hit every single guideline, say. But the way I try to look at it in terms of, how accessible a site is can you access every single section? Can someone with a disability access every single section? There's lots of times where maybe you need a mouse to click certain things or to expand certain things. And that means you're keeping that information away from someone who can't use a mouse, who needs a screen reader and uses a keyboard or has a motor disability. And so that's my definite fail for inaccessibility.
So I want to could you outline for some of the other obstacles someone might encounter, Adele. So when, say, for example, someone with low vision versus someone maybe who is using maybe a screen reader, what are some of the issues that frequently encounter on an accessible website or application or really any digital content?
Yeah, so I think for low vision, one of the biggest ones is color contrast. A lot of companies, obviously they have their brand colors and they want to stick to it, but like sometimes even if you don't have low vision, yellow text on a pink background, it's just going to be really difficult to read. But definitely if you have low vision or some form of color blindness, the color contrast ratio is really going to make a huge difference. Also things like font size. If you have things that move automatically across your page, maybe there's some sort of carousel of images, that can actually just be really disorientating for someone who takes a second to focus on what they're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. And then Adele, I want to could you walk us through, say, the auditing process? So how do IA Labs conduct an accessibility audit typically on a website or a mobile application, and say ensure that it's compliant with the WCAG guidelines that you just referred to?
Yeah, so in terms of the guidelines themselves, we have a checklist with every single guideline that we check across every single page of every single website, every single mobile application, and we give it a pass or fail mark based on those guidelines for every single page. As I've said, we use a few screen readers, so we use JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver on Mac, and then we use multiple other devices as well. So we have an Android phone, an iPhone, and an iPad and a tablet. And we check on each single, because some platforms you have bits that work and then you might go on your Android and it doesn't work anymore. So you have to check every single thing.
Okay, I gather that there's no stone but it's hence but left unturned. If there's an accessibility issue, you guys are going to find it, aren't you? By the sounds of it.
We're checking every single guideline, every single device. There's nothing we won't find.
Nothing missed. Very good. Very good. At this point, Kyran, you might come back in here. I'd like to just tell listeners a little bit about the Digital Accessibility Index, which I know was a significant component of the launch of IA Labs last week. Now, as it happens, I have the index in my hand now. It's in print form, and it is a colossal copy. It's 140 pages, A5. It must have been a mammoth undertaking. So how exactly was it done?
So the Digital Accessibility Index of Ireland is really the first time a piece of research has been done on Ireland as a whole to look at how Ireland is performing in terms of digital accessibility. So Adele and her team led the process of putting the index together. So we reviewed, and by we, for the next 5 minutes, I mean Adele, reviewed the top 100 companies in Ireland. We looked at the top 10 public and private hospitals in Ireland. We looked at the top 8 employment websites, and we looked at housing as well and the key housing websites that are out there, alongside, I think I've missed one category, Adela, which is just escaping me at the moment. But all of those websites we reviewed against the standards that that Adela referred to, the WCAG 2.1 standards, and we wanted this to be the first, not only the first, but a really comprehensive audit of what is Ireland's current level of digital accessibility, and be it as a not a mechanism to point fingers at companies that are not meeting it, but to show everyone where we're at now and where we need to go in terms of digital accessibility. And we intend to do this review every year now going forward. So IA Labs will be performing an audit in Q1 every year, and again showcasing where Ireland is in terms of digital accessibility. So it was an incredible piece of work, and to our knowledge, this is the first time it's been done as comprehensively in Ireland. And there was some areas that performed well, and there was some areas that performed not so well. And if it's okay, JP, I might just go through some of the key findings from the report, if that's all right.
The findings, thank you.
So I think what's really interesting is we didn't exclusively look at who was required to do who was required to be digitally accessible under Irish and EU law. We look broader than that. So if you look at the government departments in Ireland, we've seen that quite a few of them are now digitally accessible. So however, once you start looking outside of that, if you look at the top 100 companies, the top 100 companies in Ireland, only 28% of those companies actually passed the accessibility test that we performed on them, which is really low. So less than 30% of the top 100 companies in Ireland are actually accessible. Education is the one that I found particularly shocking, because education is such an important thing, and if you suffer from a disability, education can be even more difficult. But of the top 10 private, top 10 public schools, and the top 10 universities in Ireland, not a single one passed our accessibility test, which is really
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is terrible. So again, we also wanted to look at the healthcare system in Ireland, because through COVID-19, access to information and even being able to browse your nearest hospital is so important. So we looked at the top 10 public hospitals and the top 10 private hospitals in Ireland. And so out of those 20 that we reviewed, only one passed a digital accessibility test. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And I think, I'm hoping that the Digital Accessibility Index will draw some focus and allow them to start working on it. But I think there's areas that are also important, like in terms of, if someone has a disability and they, obviously want to live an independent life. If you look through employment and retail, from from the employment that we reviewed 9 sites, one passed, making it even harder to reach employment and achieve that level of independence as someone with a disability. But I think, again, and one thing, and Adela you might jump in on this one, but if you look at the top 100 sites, these are the top 100 companies in Ireland that most have a D&I agenda. If those websites aren't accessible, you can't apply for a job in those companies. So even if you look at an employment website, you can't apply for a job because it's digitally inaccessible. And I think, like a lot of people, shopping from home was hugely important during COVID-19. None of the top 5 grocery retailers in Ireland passed our tests. So really kind of stark findings in terms of where we're at in Ireland in terms of our digital accessibility. And I think, as I said at the start, I think we're at the start of the journey, but it's important to note that, public schools, public hospitals, because they're funded by the government, they are covered by the legislation, and none of them pass their accessibility tests. So they're required to do so in their law. And then the top 100 companies in Ireland, obviously they're private companies, so they're not currently covered under legislation, but it's still the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to have a digitally accessible website.
Do you think, kind of like, is the private sector at any point, or do you feel is it starting to embrace digital accessibility, or is it a while, as before we start seeing that?
Well, I think they are starting to talk about it. They definitely have it, diversity and inclusion on their agenda, but they haven't made their websites accessible just yet. And the biggest proportion of companies in the top 100 that had an accessible website, and Adele, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but was the technology and communication sector were the largest pass rate, which you would expect, really.
46%.
Excuse me, sorry?
46% of the tech industry passed our test.
Okay.
Which is still
less than half. Yeah.
Like still a D. I think, isn't it? Isn't that the scoring?
It's not even half.
yeah, it's not even a half. So, it really is evident that there's a lot more work to be done, and also I think what's important to note, because so many of our own service users listen to the Talking Technology podcast, is that if your website isn't accessible, you can also contact the company and say, why isn't your website accessible? You know what I mean? And actually point it out to them as well, because in IA Labs we're doing our best to raise the awareness amongst companies. But you can do that too. You can advocate for yourself as well.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, and then just to make one final thing, if you don't mind, JP. So in terms of the broadness of the actual legislation where people are required, we are expecting by 2025 that the legislation will be expanded to cover private sector websites as well. So I think you have an opportunity now to get ahead of the game and be in a position where you have an accessible website. But it is looking likely and probable that the legislation that's currently in place will be expanded to cover private sectors as well. And I think NCBI and IA Labs obviously both welcome that.
Absolutely. I'll be interested in getting your opinions, guys, as to what the future holds for digital accessibility in Ireland. And beforehand, I remember I was chatting to a service user a while ago who was using quite a website on a very well-known grocery retailer, Tesco's. And this is going back a number of years. And what happened was that Tesco actually designed two websites. They designed one, inverted commas, accessible one, and then one for just general public. What happened, I believe, was that the accessible website, it was kind of quite slow to be updated. It was, some of the online users were missing out on certain sales items and so etc. that were available on the general website. So in the end, it was one site that was designed, and really kind of coming into this whole umbrella term of inclusive design, having one accessible website, as opposed to having, for example, even two documents, one accessible PDF or Word document, and one that would just be just for everyone. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts, guys, like as a comparison of the accessibility of websites and apps, say even 5-10 years ago to present, and from say the present, from right now to 5-10 years, in 5-10 years time. Like, is the future bright, do we think? Want to start maybe yourself, Adela?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of that Tesco scenario, I mean, that's really unfortunate. But I'd say what the issue was that whoever the developers in Tesco are probably just aren't experts in accessibility, and maybe found a plugin and thought we'll have this second site and it'll work. But again, it wasn't prioritized, and it really should be, because it's not like there's really few people with disabilities. Now there's 600,000 people in Ireland with disabilities. So it's not about like it's a lot of people, and we really have to take them into account and make it a priority. But I do think it's looking up, like even in terms of the top 100 companies on the index, we said only 28% passed. Last year it was 22%.
Okay.
So I think we're making those baby steps, and the first step was caring, first of all. Companies like IA Labs devoting everything to making this a thing, bringing out an index to set a baseline for these companies, and you know, kind of taking the world into the ball of your hand and saying, what can we do with this? Where can we bring it from here?
Yeah. So it sounds like things are perhaps moving in direct direction, albeit slowly, but we're getting there. And
Yeah.
Kyran, how about yourself? And I think another point that I'd be interested to get your views on is, I'll be interested to know whether you think like digital accessibility will become like a policy feature of public and private companies in Ireland. So maybe somewhat akin to like GDPR, which we had introduced a number of years ago. So is that likely to happen?
I mean, that's a great question, and by that I mean I'm trying to take some time to think about how to answer it. So what? Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you know, I think if you look at GDPR and how that was implemented, it took people time to understand the complexities of it and the challenges of implementing that. So I think we're in the same situation for the digital accessibility legislation, like the EU directive saying that, you know, public sector bodies need to have an accessible website. So um, and it's going to, it's like, you know, it's like you said there, it might be baby steps along the journey to accessibility, but I think those baby steps are happening, you know. And I think what's important is that, you know, people also need to realize how far-reaching that legislation is, you know. So similar to GDPR, I think when everyone first heard of GDPR, like, what's that? And
Yeah.
oh, that doesn't affect me. Whereas the reality is, you know, a huge number of organizations in Ireland are affected by the current legislation. So for example, like if you look at all entities in Ireland that are funded over 50% by the state are covered by the legislation. So that obviously would cover every primary school, every secondary school, or sorry, not every, the vast majority, I should say, excluding kind of private ones. And I think, you know, I'm no expert in this field in terms of funding, but I think, you know, a lot of private schools do get some level of funding. And then on top of that, like all of the hospitals that we referred to, the GA clubs that are funded by the state. In fact, so many of the sporting organisations in Ireland have funding from Sport Ireland. So, and Sport Ireland themselves are covered under the legislation. And, you know, I think what will happen over the next, you know, 6 to 12 to 18 months is that many of the organisations will either be contacted by IA Labs and saying, you need to make your website accessible and we're here to help. Or service users that are listening today, you know, be saying, you're covered under this legislation, why don't you have an accessible website? And that's a fair question to ask because, you know, there's a law saying that you need to. So I think as the legislation beds down, and it's clear as well that the EU and Ireland are really supportive of, you know, broadening the legislation. So, I mean, I think by 2025, if all private and public sector bodies are covered under this legislation, that's a huge win for people in this country with disabilities. And I think, you know, it'll give people the kind of the impetus to start working or focusing more on having accessibility embedded in their process for, you know, development of websites, development of mobile applications.
Great. Well, I think that's a really, really good positive point to finish off on today. Kyran and Adele, thank you both for joining us on the show to tell us about IA Labs and sharing the many very interesting findings that were revealed in the Digital Accessibility Index. I think it's very obvious from today, from speaking with you about, that digital inclusion is something that you're both very passionate about promoting, and I've no doubt that IA Labs will continue to make huge strides in this area in the future. So we certainly look forward to having you both with us back on the show in the near future. Just before we go, how can someone find out about the many services available from IA Labs or receive support?
So the easiest way to get more information about IA Labs is to visit the website. So you can go to www.ialabs.ie.
Yep.
And if you'd like to download your own copy, and it's a fully accessible copy of the Digital Accessibility Index, you can go to ialabs.ie/DAI. We also have Braille versions available for people if they would like them. So if any of your listeners are Braille users, we can certainly send you a Braille version too. And we have lots of information on the products and services that are available on the IA Labs website. So, which of course is fully accessible as well, needless to say. So, if anyone out there really wants to get more information, do reach out to us. If you'd like to send us an email in IA Labs, it's just hello@ialabs.ie, and we're happy to. This is what we love, and this is what we're very passionate about. So we're happy to talk to anyone around the area of digital accessibility. So please do reach out to us.
Excellent. Kyran and Adele, thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, JP.
Great stuff. So just a few notes and reminders before we finish up our show. As a reminder, if you require any technology support from the Labs team, you can contact our help desk on 1800 911 110 or send an email to labs@ncbi.ie. Or to avail of our wider services from NCBI, you can call us on 1800 911 250 or email info@ncbi.ie. If you'd like to make a donation to NCBI to help keep our services and our podcast going, you can visit donate.ncbi.ie. So what is coming up on future shows? We have lots of great topics and guests in store for you over the coming weeks. So on the show in 2 weeks' time, we'll have an update about the NCBI Smart Hub. As a reminder, the Smart Hub provides a convenient way to avail of the many NCBI services through your smart speaker, and we'll have an update for you about its release. We'll also be joined by podcaster Stephen Scott and from the very popular Blind Guys Talk Tech podcast. I think, Kyran, you were on that show quite recently.
Yeah, it was great. Really enjoyed meeting Stephen. Yeah.
Good. So now Steve's returning the favor. He's going to be joining us on our show. On another show, we'll be joined by Hector Minto, who is Microsoft Tech Evangelist for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And finally, it's a big debate, round 3, iOS v Android. So which is the better platform? The gloves are off again as our regular panelists and special guests voice their opinions. I think, Kyran, it's fair to say which side you'll be on for that debate.
Oh, it's 100% iOS all the way.
No surprises there. So our next show will be taking place in 2 weeks' time, Tuesday, 17th of May at the usual time of 2:30 p.m. As a reminder, if you'd like to find out about what's coming up in future shows and be kept up to date with the very latest technology news for people with sight loss, you can subscribe to our weekly technology newsletter by visiting our website, ncbi.ie, or by sending us an email to labs@ncbi.ie. So all that's left for me to do today is to thank our panel of Kyran and Adele from IA Labs, and of course, everyone for listening in. So take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we look forward to having you back with us in 2 weeks' time for the next Talking Technology podcast with NCBI Labs.